Thanks be to God. You may be seated. Thank you so much for being here. Happy Memorial Day weekend to you. It's great to see you here at Community Christian Church. The final line in Hebrews chapter 6 says that we have a sure and steadfast anchor of the soul, a hope that enters into the inner place behind the curtain where Jesus has gone as a forerunner on our behalf, having become a high priest forever after the order of Melchizedek. We covered that last week. So now, okay, great. We have hope, an anchor for our soul. That's awesome. We have Jesus, who has gone ahead of us into heaven on our behalf. That's great. Jesus has become a high priest for us. That's perfect. I love it. The Hebrews writer has mentioned Jesus as a high priest before, and now that he does again. That's not new. But wait a minute. At the end, right? Who in God's blue heaven is this guy named Melchizedek? Where's he coming from? Actually, the first listeners to this sermon that we call the book of Hebrews might have also had that question, because it's like the preacher kind of anticipates it, because the very next thing he does is explain then who this guy Melchizedek is. Melchizedek pops up in the Old Testament in only two places. The main one is the middle of a story about Abram. This is actually before he's even known as Abraham, before he gets his name changed. It's in Genesis 14, and the story is actually kind of out of place. Like, we're not sure why we're even getting it. It's not even about Abram to start off. There are 9 kings in this story, and 5 of the kings get together, and they start a war with the other 4. And 5 kings take on 4. You would think that the odds are good that the 5 kings will win, right? They do not. The 4 kings win the battle, and they take a territory that includes Sodom and Gomorrah, which happens to be where Abraham's knuckleheaded nephew Lot is living. And so these conquering kings, these 4 kings, pillage and plunder, and they ride off with the spoils of war, and one of the spoils is Lot himself. He's taken hostage by these 4 kings. And some unfortunate soul escapes all of this and is able to go to Abram and tell him all about this, that his lot has been taken captive. And when Abram hears about this, he gathers up 318 of his own trained men. And the text says this, that all of those men were born in his house. That's amazing to ponder. Like, how big is Abraham's estate when he has 318 trained men that have been born in his household? And so Abraham and his 318 men set out to get Lot back. They attack in the night, and they completely rout the 4 kings, and they rescue Lot, and they bring back not only Lot, but all the plunder that the 4 kings had taken in their victory, all the gold and all the silver and all the possessions, and Lot himself, And Abraham and his 318 trained men are now arriving back home. And you can see this picture in your mind. You can imagine the victory parade that this kind of was, right? By the way, Abraham is never in Scripture called a king. He's not a king. But Abraham is absolutely a force. My goodness. And by his defeat of these kings, maybe the message is that Abraham is greater than a king. Any way you slice it, just don't mess with Abraham, okay? But the middle of the victory celebration happens, and this guy named Melchizedek appears just in the middle of the victory celebration. Genesis says that he's the king of Salem. It also says that he was the priest of God Most High. And it's the very first time in Genesis where God is described by the Hebrew El Elyon. That's the name for God here. And it says that he brings out this Melchizedek. He brings out bread and wine for Abram. It says that he blesses Abram. It says that he blesses El Elyon, which is God. And it says that Abram gives Melchizedek a tenth of all the plunder that he had recovered from the 4 kings. And that's it. Like, that's That's pretty much all we get. He pops up, he does his little cameo appearance, and then he just disappears. And we just don't know, like, who is this guy Melchizedek? Where did he come from? How was he a king? Did he actually know Abraham before all of this? How in the world did he get to be a priest of the Most High God before priests of the Most High God were even a thing? There are more questions than there are answers. And because there are more questions than answers, Melchizedek, after this, becomes fodder for quite a few conspiracy theories among the Jewish people. Like some rabbis taught that Melchizedek was actually Noah's son Shem that got off the ark. And other writings present Melchizedek as kind of this comic book superhero kind of character. The most outrageous take is from the book of Enoch that says Melchizedek was miraculously conceived, and when he was born a fully clothed and fully developed man. Okay. Right? Interestingly, the Hebrews writer picks up Melchizedek, this little incident, and he kind of deals with it. And in his description, it's very sober. There's no speculative material. It's all straight from Genesis 14. I want you to look at the first of chapter 7. He says that Melchizedek is a king of Salem, just like Genesis. Most commentators actually will point out that Salem was probably the very same place that will later be called Jerusalem. Okay? And he notes the significance of this name. Melchizedek means king of righteousness. And his title, King of Salem, can also be understood as King of Peace. And so whatever else we can say about Melchizedek, his reign as king is characterized most by righteousness and by peace. And then the Hebrews writer will point to Melchizedek's lack of genealogy. Now that's weird for us, but that's very meaningful to the Hebrews that he's talking to. It's not that Melchizedek really has no mother or father. It's that none of his heritage is mentioned. And that's a weird thing because priests and kings are made into priests and kings because of the family that they are born into. But that information for Melchizedek is missing. And so we have no idea who Melchizedek's people were or what his lineage was. The Hebrews writer tells us that Melchizedek is not only the priest of the Most High God, but a unique one in that he is a priest forever. Just like his lineage is never mentioned, also his death is never mentioned. We're never told about what happened to Melchizedek or who might have replaced him or even if he was replaced. And so he kind of has, it's not that he never died probably here, but it's like he has this kind of type of forever priesthood because that's all we know that he ever was, priest of the Most High God. And it's the not knowing what happened to him that's kind of the point. Not knowing what happened to him allows this idea that he was a priest who remains a priest forever. And he says, Melchizedek bless Abraham, and Abraham gave him a tenth of everything. Then finally, the remarkable bit here is that even though Abraham is so great, I mean, think about his estate, what he just did. He's the father of what will become the Israelite nation, right? As great as he is, Melchizedek here seems to be greater. Think about that. Abraham is the father of Israel. Abraham is the guy who God came to and said, through you, the whole world will be blessed. It seems like Abraham then is the one who should be giving the blessings out, but it's exactly the opposite. Abraham receives a blessing from this priest, Melchizedek, and it's clear to us that Abraham was honored by that. He was fortunate to have that. He was blessed to be blessed by Melchizedek. And in this blessing business, maybe the picture you could have in your mind is maybe of an ancient king who is kind of giving knighthood to a worthy knight, like dubbing him up with a sword on the shoulders, right? That's kind of the idea here. Well, it's the king alone that does that kind of knighting, right? It's the greater, that blesses the lesser. And so it is here. Melchizedek is the one giving the blessing. And so he is the one that is greater than Abraham. And so how does Abraham respond to this great priest king giving him this blessing? He does this. He further echoes his greatness by giving Melchizedek a tenth of all of his plunder as tribute. Now, I told you Melchizedek appears 2 times in the Old Testament. He appears here in this story in Genesis in the middle of this, and that's his one historical appearance. And then the other is just a reference, and it's Psalm 110. And Psalm 110 is actually the most quoted Old Testament text in the New Testament. It's quoted the most in the New Testament. And Psalm 110 is this psalm that is celebrating the power and the magnificence of a conquering king. And we learned that this conquering king is not only a conquering king, but he's also a priest, but a very different kind of priest. He's a priest forever after the order of Melchizedek. And so here he is again. And just like he showed up with Abraham, again he shows up, Melchizedek shows up in the middle of a victory celebration of a conquering king. And now the important thing to know about Psalm 110 is that the writers of the New Testament, like Peter and Paul and the writer of Hebrews, whoever that was, and even Jesus himself, all will look at Psalm 110, and they will all conclude that Psalm 110 is ultimately about Jesus. Jesus is the conquering king. Jesus is the promised priest. Jesus looks more like Melchizedek kind of priest than any of the Levitical priests of Israel. What have we said all along the way through our journey in Hebrews? We've said that the main message of Hebrews is this: don't quit. Keep going. And how does the Hebrews writer make the case for this kind of perseverance? By saying over and over again, Jesus is better. Don't quit, because Jesus is better. Jesus is better than the prophets. Jesus is better than the angels. Jesus is better than Moses. And now he will show with Melchizedek's help that Jesus is better than any Levitical priest that you've ever had. Why? Because Jesus looks a whole lot more like Melchizedek than he does any of the Levitical priests of Israel. And that actually makes him a better priest. And this is the hinge of the whole argument in the middle of the book of Hebrews. Let me show you the 2 ways that hit me as I was kind of going through this last week. And there are probably a dozen, like literally a dozen of these in this text. I won't do that to you today, right? But let me give you two ways that Jesus is the better priest. He's the priest that we all need. First, he's a better priest because Jesus saves completely. Completely. The Hebrews writer will point to all the priests who served under the covenant that God made with Abraham, and I want you to make no mistake, they played a very indispensable role in the practice of the Jewish faith. They served as a bridge, linking God to people and people to God. And their importance is best seen probably in the high priest, because everything about the high priest pointed to the fact that he served to represent God to the people and the people to God. His very clothes said this. The garments he wore were made of the same material that was used to make the tabernacle itself. Both used blue and purple and scarlet thread, and both had gold clasps and rings. He wore a blue garment over a white robe, which was the same color as the coverings of each of the pieces of the furniture that were put in the tabernacle. And all of this made the high priest, when he was wearing his vestments, look like a mini walking, talking tabernacle. And so now God is able to meet the people through the high priest. The inverse was also true. Also part of the high priest's vestments was a breastplate that had 12 precious stones with the names of each of the tribes of Israel engraved upon them. And then on each shoulder was an onyx stone that was also engraved with each of the 12 tribes' names. And so the effect was that when the high priest went into the presence of God, into the Holy of Holies, he carried the people with him. They were on his shoulder. They were on his heart. The high priest was the boundary between human and heaven. And the most important day for the high priest was the Day of Atonement. On this one day, and only on this one day, the high priest would dress in all of his sacred vestments, and he would go behind the curtain into the innermost place in the tabernacle or the temple, into the Holy of Holies. And Leviticus 16 tells us he would go in exactly on that day 3 times. The first time was to put a cloud of incense over the Ark of the Covenant to protect him from the overwhelming presence of God. The second time he went in, he would go in with the blood of a bull to atone for his own sins and for the sins of his family. Oh, you've heard about PKs. Can you imagine being an HBK, like a high priest kid? Like, would you just stop sinning? I am spending a ton of time. We've had a lot of bull's blood in there because of you. Stop it, right? And then the third time in the high priest, that he goes in, he takes the blood of a goat into God's presence, and he sprinkles it on the mercy seat of the Ark of the Covenant in order to atone for all the sins of the people. And all of this was important, and all of this was awesome. All of this was sacred. All of this was spiritually meaningful. All of this was necessary. This was set up, this whole thing, by God himself. He set it up this way. But the uncomfortable truth is that all of this was also inadequate. It was never enough. Even after it was atoned for, sin never stops, right? The blood of bulls and goats never covers sin forever. It was all insufficient. And this is actually the drum that the Hebrews writer is going to be beating for a while. And we're going to get to the blood of bulls and goats later. But chapter 7 is all about the insufficiency of the high priest specifically. The high priest was limited in many ways. And Hebrews points out 2 main limitations. Number 1, the Levitical high priests were limited by their own death. Verse 23 says the former priests were many in number because they were prevented by death from continuing in office. So the first priest was Moses' brother Aaron. And he was the very first high priest. And Numbers tells us that at the end of his term as high priest, Numbers 20, God takes Moses and Aaron's son Eleazar to the peak of Mount Hor. And Moses removes Aaron's priestly garments and puts them on his son Eleazar. And after he did that, Aaron died on the top of the mountain, right there. And Eleazar took over as high priest. Later, when he came to his end, his son Phinehas took the high priest position. And on and on and on it goes, from father to son. Josephus, actually in the first century, calculated that there had been 83 high priests that served from Aaron to the time that the temple was destroyed in 70 AD. The bridge between God and man was always, because of this, always wearing out. It was always needing replaced, and that's a limitation. Here's the second limitation. Levitical high priests were limited by their own sin. Verse 27 says that all these other priests had to offer sacrifices on a daily basis. First, for their own sin, right? Then secondly, for the sin of the people. The high priest, the very bridge to God, couldn't even function as this bridge to God until he had first offered sacrifices for his own sin. It would be as if we are maybe charged with murder. Think about that, okay? And maybe you're charged with murder, and so what do? You go out and you hire a lawyer for your defense. And let's just say that you find out that the lawyer you hired also happens to be on trial for murder himself, right? Now, he can't represent you now until he clears his own name. And even if he does clear his own name, is that really the lawyer that you want? That is the sacrificial system of the Old Testament in a nutshell. The priest himself has sinned. And so right out of the gate, the system is just broken. There's no sacrifice that priest could ever make that would ever be good enough. Perfection in God's people just is not ever going to happen this way. And the Hebrews writer recognizes this. And then he points us to Psalm 110. And Psalm 110 promises us a new kind of priest, one that is finally enough, one that is sufficient. And guess who this new priest is? You know it, Jesus. By the way, whoever wrote Hebrews is the only writer in the entire New Testament to make this connection, that Jesus is way less like the Levitical priests of the Old Testament and way more like Melchizedek, who was priest of the Most High God. And he lays out his case here that Jesus is the priest of promise. Jesus is the priest who is totally sufficient. Why? Because his priesthood is based on his indestructible life, just like Melchizedek. Indestructible life. What a great phrase that is. And it should make you think, first and foremost, of the resurrection. I hope it does. Even death couldn't wreck Jesus. He's indestructible. He's a priest forever, truly so, because he will never die. He defeated death, and now he lives eternally. And so that means he has a permanent priesthood, just like Melchizedek. And also, Jesus has no sin like normal priests. He is without sin. And so his sacrifice now that is made without sin, it's a perfect sacrifice, can be lasting. It can be total. It can be a once and for all sacrifice of sin. And with this kind of perfect sacrifice, Jesus becomes the one high priest who is totally sufficient and perfect forever. And then Jesus becomes the one and only high priest who can save us, here's the phrase, to the uttermost. It means completely. Jesus is a priest after the order of Melchizedek, and he's the only priest that can truly meet our need. He's the only priest. He's a priest more like Melchizedek than any other priest who can save us totally and completely, just like we need to be. Now, I promised you two today. And here's the second reason Jesus is a better priest. Jesus saves us with an infallible case. Look at verse 27. It says this: He does not need to offer sacrifices daily. Don't rush by that. What does that mean? He doesn't offer sacrifices daily. He doesn't need to. Okay, hold on. Offering sacrifices is like the whole job of a priest. That's what they do. And so you're telling me he doesn't need to do that? He doesn't need to do the very thing that a priest is charged to do as his job? Like, how is that possible? Why is that? Look at the verse, the end of the verse for the answer. It's this: because Jesus offered himself as the sacrifice. That's the answer. And this sacrifice that Jesus makes of himself is so great that it's only necessary to do once. The verse says that Jesus' sacrifice for himself was once for all. Because Jesus went to a cross as a perfect human sacrifice, his blood is able to cover all human sin for all time to come. And all of that gives Jesus the perfect, infallible case before God. Maybe you have been involved in a jury trial along the way. Maybe you've watched one on TV. That's probably more likely. Here's a question: how do lawyers get their clients acquitted? Well, there are lots of answers to that, all kinds of ways. A lawyer can try flowery words. They can find loopholes in laws to try to get their client acquitted. They can do cartwheels in front of a jury. They can blackmail a judge. They can buy the jury, things like that. And when a lawyer tries all of those kind of things to win a case, what does that tell you? It tells you he doesn't have a case, right? And it's possible that we think that that's how Jesus has to defend us before God. Like, I'm pretty sure maybe that Jesus has to resort to some courtroom trickery to get God to let me go. Like Jesus would be defending me in the courtroom of God, and he would say, Father, I have Dusty today, docket 555-704-1318, and I'm defending Dusty. And let's just get right to it. He did it. He's guilty. And we've been here before, God. And I pled for him before, and you let him go. But here we are. Here we are again. He did it again. But Father, please, pretty please, would you just find it in your love to give him another chance? Like, I'm just begging for the mercy of the court. And we picture God kind of reluctantly saying, well, okay, I guess one more time, but just this once, right? Here's a question. If that's how the court in heaven plays out, then how many times can God do that? When does God finally say, you know what? Even for you, my son, Jesus, even for you, I can't let this go on. Like Dusty is cooked. He has done so much sin, and he will not stop being a sinner, and nothing is ever going to change that. So I'm sorry, but he's guilty. There are no more chances. I've finally had enough. We're done. Bang. Guilty. The unbelievable reality of the gospel is that it doesn't go that way at all. Not even close. Jesus doesn't plead with the court. He doesn't have to buy the court. He doesn't have to do cartwheels to get God to let you go. Jesus doesn't have to do that because our high priest Jesus, our lawyer, our defender, walks into the courtroom of heaven with the perfect case on your behalf before God. And here's the way you win in court. You win with a perfect case in front of judge and jury, and Jesus has it. Well, what is it? Verse 27. He sacrificed for their sins once for all. The perfect case of the court in heaven is Jesus' sacrifice of himself. It's his blood that has paid for sin. Jesus' blood satisfies now God's justice. And let me spell it out for you completely. I think that when Jesus is there with you in God's courtroom, in heaven's courtroom, and he's defending you before the judge of the universe, I think he will say something like this: God, they've sinned. They're sinners. And your law says that the wages of sin is death. That's what they deserve. They deserve death. But God, look at my blood that was shed. See my body hanging on a cross. That was the sacrifice. That was the payment for their sin. I died in their place, so now their penalty has been paid. I've paid it all. And now, as they're before you, even though sin is who they are, I will point to your justice, God, and all I ask of the court is that you be just. I've already paid for their sin with my blood. And so now, God, it would be unjust for you to exact another payment for the sin when it's already been paid for. Having to pay twice for the same sin is unjust. And so since I paid for it, your own justice demands that they go free. What a case that is. What an infallible case that is. Jesus doesn't walk in and just ask for mercy from God. He demands justice from God. He demands our acquittal. And guess what? He wins the case. The spectacular thing here is that none of this depends on what we've done. Put yourself Put your deeds in this life on the scales of God's justice, and you will lose every time. If it's up to your record, you are done. But it's not, is it? The gospel is that the case before God depends on what Jesus has done, not on what I have done or you have done. And because of what he has done for us by his blood, look, he is able to save us. What's the word? To the uttermost. If they owe anything, God, I have paid it. So be just. Let them go. It's a perfect case. And the result of that perfect case is that now I don't need to worry. I don't need to pretend. I don't need to try harder so that God will give me another chance. No. I just need Jesus. And with Jesus, God looks at us. And what does he see? He does not see our sin. He sees his Son. He sees Jesus, the King and the great high priest who sacrificed himself for us. Just like the Levitical high priest wore the ephod and the breastplate with all the jewels inscribed with the 12 names of the tribes of Israel, just like that, Jesus goes before the Father. And he goes before the Father with your name on his shoulders and on his heart. Your name inscribed in beauty and glory. And now when God sees you, he does not see your sin. He sees the King of righteousness. He sees the King of peace. And this perfect case, presented by the perfect lawyer, the perfect high priest, Jesus, this case has been made for you. Jesus will defend you. You just need to let him. You just need to say, like David did earlier, Jesus, be my attorney. Jesus, represent me. Jesus, defend me. Jesus, save me to the uttermost. God, we want to be acceptable to you, but we can't be, not on our own. But Jesus has made a way. Jesus is the only bridge that we have so that we can completely come to you, fully come to you. Let us welcome him in. Let us make him our great high priest. And it's in the name of the Son who has been made perfect forever. It's in the name of Jesus that we pray together. And everybody said,